what happened to the Mamas and the Papas.
John Phillips, who was born in 1935, belonged to the same generation as Elvis Presley. His upbringing was chaotic and he had a challenging childhood and youth. Through bands like the Smoothies and the Journeymen, he began his musical career with pop music before transitioning to soft jazz and later folk music. The latter group was one of the early 1960s folk music boom's most promising small bands. In the end, both Phillips' first marriage and the Journeymen disintegrated, but his efforts to achieve musical fame persisted. His other ventures didn't fare much better, but Phillips and Michelle Gilliam got married and began writing songs. Marshall Brickman, a future screenwriter, and Michelle Gilliam, a young model and singer, formed the new Journeymen with Phillips. One song that they co-wrote during this time had some potential and was catchy and portrayed an idealized vision. Cassandra Elliott was active in the off-Broadway theater community in New York and had success with touring the Music Man shows. Together with Tim Rose, who was once affiliated with the Smoothies, she transitioned into the folk music genre. They comprised two-thirds of the Triumvirate, a trio for which James Hendrix served as the third member. This trio later rose to fame at New York City's bitter end as the Big Three. With the use of electric instruments and a stronger emphasis on folk-based music, Mugwumps were on the cusp of a new sound. When Phillips made the decision to relaunch his trio as the new Journeymen, they were about to collapse. The Mugwumps, which also featured Elliott, Hendrix, Zalianovsky, John Sebastian of Loving Spoonful, and Dennis Doherty, eventually replaced the Big Three as the dominant group. Cass Elliot, meanwhile, was singing jazz to pay her bills in Washington, D.C. no less. If not for the fact that Doherty invited his fellow members to attend her performance, the new Journeymen might have gone it alone. Despite some opposition from John Phillips regarding Elliott's enormous size, as well as her forceful attitude and allegedly her singing, the quartet came together. They all headed west in search of success after some personality ups and downs. A trip to the Caribbean, which was later made famous by the song Creek Alley, an accident that suddenly had Elliott hitting what Phillips said were the right notes, and some acid use and drug experimentation along the way. Late in 1965, the group set out for California but was rejected by Frank Werber, the former manager of the Kingston Trio, whose band The We Five, which had a sound that was somewhat reminiscent of Phillips and Company, was having major success with its cover of Sylvia Fricker's You Were On My Mind. The quartet submitted an audition tape to Lou Adler, the head of the label, at the suggestion of Barry McGuire, a former member of the New Christie Minstrels and an old friend of Elliott's who had just released his biggest hit, Eve of Destruction, on Dunhill Records. Their audition tape included California Dreamin', Monday Monday, and many other songs that would eventually make up their debut album. Their album, If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears, came up after their breakthrough song California Dreamin', which was released at the beginning of 1966 and shot up the charts when Adler immediately signed them. That album was among the best representations of what would eventually be referred to as sunshine pop, and it is still one of the best displays of harmony vocals in 1960s music. Listeners could savor the radiant splendors of Go Where You Wanna Go, Got a Feeling, and 8 more unabashed gems in addition to the 2 hit singles California Dreamin' and Monday Monday. They reciprocated by elevating the album to the top of the charts and keeping it among the best-selling albums in the nation for months. Sadly, this would also be the high point for the Mamas and the Papas as an album act. They would never again put out a long player that was quite as reliable in terms of quality and creativity. John and Michelle Phillips were married, but that didn't stop Doherty, who had already been the object of Elliott's affections, from pairing off with Michelle Phillips, and in the process, engendering stress and mistrust all around. This threatened the unity of the group and its sound, as well as the foursome's reasons for working as a group, which had been cultivated for a year. Michelle Phillips' relationship with Gene Clark, the Byrds' principal composer, co-founder, and lead singer, added to this strain. To make matters worse, she was eventually accused of betraying the band because of her outward displays of attraction to Clark, and she even faced being fired at one point. Attempts were made to replace her with Jill Gibson while they were recording their self-titled second album in the summer of 1966, and to this day, it is unknown who played what parts on which tracks. The studio sound of the Mamas and the Papas was expertly crafted. The vocals from the quartet and the band's recordings were carefully crafted in the final mix. Whether listened to at home or on the radio, their albums continue to hold up amazingly well. Among their songs are Dedicated to the One I Love, Creek Alley, and Look Through My Window. Despite the quality of their second and third albums, the band's fortunes never truly recovered from that point of discord in the early half of 1966. While resolving the initial issues had allowed them to continue working together, the motivation soon became a matter of protecting the success they were enjoying. In essence, they were in it for the money, the prestige, and the stardom, as much as and perhaps more than the sheer joy of the sin. They had arrived in Los Angeles in a relative innocence, basically four happy people who were happy just to be singing together. This was logical considering that they were all for the first time earning enormous sums of money from their music, were at the center of the LA music scene, and were almost as well known on a national scale as the Beatles. Their popularity was strikingly comparable to that of the Liverpool Quartet because both groups consisted of four distinctive and well-known individuals. Despite the idealistic nature of their songs, Phillips and Doherty were highly hedonistic. They had access to all the sensual pleasures that California had to offer in the late 1960s. Cass Elliot, who assisted in the formation of Crosby, Stills, and Nash, may have had an equally significant indirect impact on American music as John Phillips. John Phillips' impact on popular culture peaked in late spring 1967, when he and Lou Adler co-organized the Monterey International Pop Festival with help from Michelle Phillips. The event launched the careers of dozens of mostly San Francisco-based acts, including those of Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, The Electric Flag, and Phillips' former friend and journeyman bandmate Scott McKenzie. It was the first and most well-known rock festival of the 1960s musically. Phillips had written a song called San Francisco, Be Sure to Wear Some Flowers in Your Hair in honor of the festival, which he gave to McKenzie to record as a solo debut on Adler. The reason why Phillips didn't give it to his group, other than perhaps the fact that they weren't recording or even working at the time, has never been made clear. But McKenzie enjoyed a top 5 hit and was suddenly in almost as much demand as the Mamas and the Papas. By that point, Spanky and Our Gang, a Chicago-based band with folk roots and flawless vocals built around a powerful female singer, had even emerged as something of a rival, at least in the eyes of the general public. However, they were a little more diverse in their repertoire and placed a greater emphasis on comedy and a certain theatricality in their performance. The Mamas and the Papas and Phillips' final major concert as musical influencers occurred in Monterey. Even the group's appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show had required extensive lip-syncing to existing tracks, and in all honesty, the group's studio sound, because the way it was built up in two separate perfect layers that were then combined, was very difficult to replicate on stage. Doherty had only just made it in time for the performance when the group performed as the festival's closing act. This performance was later released as the only official example of the group's live performances. On those 3 LPs and 36 songs, they had simultaneously performed the majority of their repertoire and most of their energy had been used up. The Papas and the Mamas, John and Michelle Phillips' 4th album, was recorded in a home studio they built. Assassinations, the protracted Vietnam War, and the festering political scars that the war created had all begun to eat away at society's fabric by 1968. Older teenagers felt increasingly out of touch with John Phillips's Pied Piper-like influence, luring them to California and an imagined quasi-hippie lifestyle. Cass Elliot was the first to make a name for herself in her own right. Her larger-than-life persona made her a natural for pop stardom, and her musical chops were the strongest when performed alone. She also had a big voice and had a background in acting, which made her a natural whether recording alone or with Dave Mason. Her first solo performance attempt in Las Vegas was a complete failure, but by the early 1970s, she was back on track. The Wolf King of LA is a solo album by John Phillips. It earned favorable reviews from critics but was a commercial failure, and Denny Doherty's solo albums also lost popularity fast. Michelle Phillips focused on raising their daughter China Phillips. She also briefly worked as a recording artist, but her acting career remained her main focus as she made a dramatic impression in a period drama called Dillinger from 1973. To complete its contract, the group did get back together in the studio at the beginning of the decade. The tragic passing of Cass Elliot on July 29, 1974 was the group's most memorable incident, though, unfortunately. In 1983, John Phillips performed alone at the Bitter End in New York. He had struggled with various drug issues during most of the 1970s. In 1997, the Mamas and the Papas were honored with a spot in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Their first 4 LPs have been reissued numerous times with wildly differing degrees of quality. Surprisingly, 4 books have also been written about the history of the group. And as I've heard, any of these are worth reading since they provide an interesting, enlightening, and even depressing glimpse into the real 1960s idealism. And if you want to check out any of those books, I will have the link to all those books in the description below. However, in 2003, Denny Doherty, who had previously toured with a version of the Mamas and the Papas, debuted the autobiographical stage musical Dream a Little Dream of Me, in which he also starred in New York. John Phillips' death on March 18th of that year would seem to have put an end to any but the most exploitive reincarnations of the group. On January 19th, 2007, Doherty passed away in his Ontario home. He had undergone surgery for an abdominal aortic aneurysm, but the cause of his kidney failure was not understood at the time. And as of August 2022, Michelle Phillips is still alive and she is the last remaining surviving member of the Mamas and the Papas. And that's what happened to the Mamas and the Papas. Thank you for watching, and like and subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know who do you want me to see do next on this channel, and give me some of your favorite Mamas and the Papas song. And don't forget, if you want to check out those books, I have links in the description below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.